Okay, so a really warm welcome to everybody tonight. Thank you for joining us. This is obviously a topic that's really important to a lot of us. When we're seeing patients at Allevia, 9 times out of 10 when we ask why you're struggling with weight, a lot of people will put their hand up and say that emotional eating is part of it. So we thought it might be useful to go over that and some strategies for how we can manage with emotional eating too. So we'll be covering over that tonight. There'll be a bit of content at the start, and then we'll go ahead, leave some time for questions and answers as well. So just to introduce myself, I'm the founder and director of Allevia Medical Weight Loss. I'm a bariatric GP. I have the best job in the world. I love what I do. And I'm also have been the immediate past chair of the RSEGP Specific Interest Group. I'm just watching the participants and making sure everyone's getting in at the same time. So the sort of format for tonight, a little bit of getting to know you, a little bit about who we are at Allevia, and then we'll get stuck into the content around what is emotional eating, what is binge eating, because that's important for us to differentiate between those two things, and then what strategies can we use to manage emotional eating, and then we'll leave some time for questions and answers so that you can jump in and ask all the questions that you've always wanted to as well. And then a little bit of time for feedback at the end. So we really want this to be a nice, enjoyable night for you. As I was driving here to work tonight, I'm thinking, how many of us have got our glass of wine and a little box of chocolates next to us? Because sometimes that's what I end up wanting to do at the end of the night to wind down. Trish, I can see you reaching out for your nice glass of water there. Well done. So enjoy tonight. Just pop yourselves on mute, please, if you don't mind, and just leave your videos on so we can see all your lovely faces, and feel free to drop some questions in on the chat as we go as well. All right, so most of you are patients of Allevia. For those who aren't, just wanted to introduce our fantastic team. So these are all of our amazing Allevia doctors or bariatricians. Most of these gang are our Juan Turner doctors. So Dr Janelle Francis, Dr Julie Chang, Andrea Ryan, Dr Nicolette Scapers, myself and Dr Charmaine Tay. Then at East Melbourne, we have Dr Ella Barclay, Dr Ankit Gupta, Emily McMullen, Dr Hilda Dr Tamsin Rhodes and Dr Doyle. And over in Adelaide, we have Dr Belinda Jennings, and Dr Neha Parvatretti is also a GP in Melbourne with us in Juan Turner. We also have a dietitian and an exercise physiologist with us as well. And we're across 3 sites in Melbourne, in East Melbourne, Caulfield, Juan Turner. And so just a reminder to pop yourselves on mute if you can, guys. That'd be great. And then we're also in Adelaide as well. Our core values, these are really important to us, and they're what drive us in our work every day. And the main value that we have is around compassionate care, which is making sure that we deliver care that's non-judgmental, that we're supportive of you on your journey. Then we have, patient-centered care, and that's what tonight's about. We really want to put on things that are valuable to you, and making sure that we, our weight loss programs that we deliver are tailored to the individual. Excellence in care is really important to us, so that we make sure that we're giving you the best of treatments that are available. Loving what you do. We love what we do, and we celebrate the wins with all of our patients, and innovation as well. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a think about what causes emotional eating. Now, I've just, in terms of the sound, I'm just getting a little bit of feedback of people who their things are coming off mute. I've just tried to mute, but they're coming off mute. So if you wouldn't mind, see if you can tend to that on. Oh, look, I've got a mute all button. Oh, that's powerful. All right, I think I might have managed that. All right, so if we look at what causes emotional eating, what I want to point out, one of the things that we do is we tend to blame ourselves a little bit for emotional eating and think, oh, I should be able to control this eating. But the very basics of what drives our eating is our genetics and how that affects our biology. So primarily we're human beings that are designed to survive, survival of the fittest. And we have very strong drives in our body to make sure that we eat. thirst, breathing, and reproduction. There are some of our very strong primal drives. So our genetics and our biology then influences our hunger and satiety. And that's almost like the background level running behind everything. So if we don't eat, then we're going to fall off the perch because we will starve and not have enough on board, and our body makes sure that that doesn't happen. So hunger and biology, we'll go through that in just a moment. Then there's our psychological cues. So there might be, stressors or anxiety or depression or life events that happen that have us reaching for food, because food definitely has a stimulus and a reward effect for us. And then that leads on to certain eating behaviors. So it's very simplistic to say it's just a case of eat less, move more to lose weight. That's not sufficient. We need to be considering all these aspects of eating when we're managing weight. But what I will say is, primarily, if you don't take care of the biology and genetics and you're hungry all the time, it's going to be very hard to implement some strategies around saying no to treat foods. So you have to tackle all these things together. If we do look at biology and how that works with appetite control, we know that our body has a set point of weight that we tend to hover around, and the brain is really in control of your weight. Your brain determines from your biology, from your genetics you've inherited from your family, what degree of appetite you have and what propensity you have to be able to store weight. Remembering that storing weight is a survival advantage. If you've got a little bit more extra, energy in reserve in the form of our fat stores, then you're going to be able to survive a famine. So many people struggle with this predisposition because it's built into our genetics. It's about survival. So what we have is this, what we call this set point or ability to store weight. And then your brain goes about defending that and making sure that everything is steady. So this is in a special part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And this part of the brain receives input from the gut. So if we think about what stimulates appetite, it's a hormone called ghrelin, and that's made in the stomach. And that tells the brain to go and get food because we're hungry and we're running out of energy. And that normally, it starts to rise within about half an hour of a meal. You don't notice much then, but by 3 to 4 hours after a meal, you're really starting to kind of notice, I think it's time for something to eat. That's just ghrelin working away in the background, reminding you to eat so that you don't die. Then we have these other hormones that are produced in the gut, so the small and large intestine and the pancreas. There's about 9 or 10 of these hormones that then tell the brain when we've got food that we can stop eating. And we call these hormones our satiety hormones. So things like cholecystokinin and GLP-1 and insulin and amylin, these hormones are like our brake pedal. They tell the brain, yep, we're full, and that we can stop eating. And then, so these ghrelin and our gut hormones are telling us about the immediate amount of food that's in our body. And then our leptin, made from our fat cells, tells the brain about how much energy we've got in reserve. So here we've got our short-term energy signaling going on here, and our leptin is our long-term energy signaling. And so, as you can see, control of eating is actually a complex interplay between these hormones. And in people who struggle with weight, the tendency is to not feel full until we're reaching a higher level of food. So this graph is showing our meal size versus that feeling of satiety or fullness. And in an individual who keeps a normal weight, you don't feel full with a small meal size. But as that meal size goes up, we suddenly, reach this feeling of satiety, and that's our brake pedal to stop. For individuals who struggle with weight or have a propensity for weight, that sort of signal of stopping doesn't kick in until a larger meal. And so the portion sizes tend to creep out, and that feeling of satiety is not kicking in until a lot later. Versus naturally lean people, who you might think of them as little birds just picking at food. They might have small amounts and suddenly feel full, and that's enough for them. They're not trying to restrict their food. Their brain is just kicking in and saying, yep, I'm done. So that's how our biology and genetics affect our weight, is in controlling our hunger signals that then inform our eating decisions. But what happens is sometimes those eating decisions, we know that we can feel full, right? We've all had this feeling of the Christmas lunch feeling where you've felt full and then you've gone, oh, but there's my chocolate pie, or the chocolate mousse that comes out, or and all of a sudden we found our dessert stomach. So what we know is that the reward aspect of eating can override those feelings of either hunger or fullness, particularly fullness. So we think of eating as a combination of hunger and the reward or the emotional aspect to eating. So what about these reward centers in our brain? Why have we got them and what do they do? So as I mentioned before, our primal drives are reproduction. So things that are sensual and, sexy, visionary things are going to be stimulating to the brain, as is that sort of bonding that we see in parents. So that love oxytocin drug gets involved a little bit there. Thirst, that's another key drive for us, and that's actually controlled in our hypothalamus, and hunger. Now, if you think of these two images here and what looks more appealing, what happens is our brain distinguishes what foods are going to be more salient. In other words, what foods are going to be more important to us. And the foods that are often energy dense are the ones that the brain, that caveman brain is looking for, because foods that are energy dense are going to give us that energy that we need in the quickest way possible. So we don't tend to crave a steak and salad, although those who've been to America and come back after eating sugary food often do, like, oh my God, just give me something healthy. But often our brain is looking for highly stimulating and rewarding foods. And the problem is that food manufacturers know this. They've studied the brain biochemistry, and and what they're doing is that they know that you enjoy those foods. They know that those foods are highly rewarding for the brain. And so they put those foods together with high in fat, high in sugar, and high in salt. Think about your salted caramel chocolate, for example, and those foods really turn the brain on in a big way, and they can be highly addictive. So our reward centers are there to stimulate your brain and to help you to get food. So I just wanted to read out something which is a definition of reward. So a reward is any stimulus, object, event, activity, or situation that has the potential to make us approach it and consume it. So I can think about a couple of things there: chocolate, wine, etc. And the reward system motivates our animals, us humans, to approach stimuli or engage in a behavior that increases survival. And that could be, sex, for example, or energy-dense food. Both of those things are going to propagate our species. And survival for most animal species depends on maximizing contact with beneficial stimuli and minimizing contact with harmful stimuli. So we're hardwired to move towards things which are rewarding and to move away from things that are painful and uncomfortable. And then the reward pathways come in there and they reinforce consumption of that positive stimuli, and then our behaviors and positive feelings that are associated with that then drive us towards that behavior again. So we have developed over many millennia the ability to distinguish what things are going to help us survive, and our brain is very much hardwired for looking for joy, pleasure, enjoyment. So in the brain, how does that work in the brain? So if we look at a concept of the brain here, we have the hypothalamus and the brainstem here. So here's our hypothalamus and pituitary. Brainstem is here. So what happens is when we eat, we get the release of dopamine. And dopamine is one of our lovely, neurotransmitters that lights us up and gets us excited. Think about Candy Crush, that game. Not that I've played that before, but apparently that gives you a dopamine hit. Or when you clear your inbox and you've got 0 there, that's another dopamine hit. Same with food. So the nucleus accumbens is that part of the brain that's our reward center. And so there's a flood of dopamine into that reward center after seeing, even just seeing or thinking about a positive stimulus, i.e. food. Then we get this orbitofrontal cortex, which is our decision-making part of our brain. It's the part of the brain that says, is this going to be rewarding or is this going to be, unpleasant for us? Then we have the hippocampus and the amygdala, and these parts of the brain help us to form memories about that stimulus and whether there's a reward associated with it. So emotions and memory. And then we've got the prefrontal cortex and the cingulate gyrus, and they help us to exhibit inhibition. So yeah, it's like the angel and the devil sitting on our shoulder. Yes, I want that food, but no, I shouldn't, because I'm trying to do something different and look after myself. And then what happens in, sorry, just moving the chat out the way there. What happens in sort of food addiction is that these cycles of reward get amplified. Okay, so normally what happens is we've got our higher control centers in our brain overriding these urges, because we have urges all the time. They come and go, and we can normally regulate those. But when it comes to food, it says addicted brain because these models are based on other forms of addiction like alcohol and smoking. But some of the same kind of principles apply to food, where we get activation of these reward pathways, especially in response to seeing high fat, high calorie foods. That really activates our reward system. Dopamine is released into the nucleus accumbens. And in people who are prone to weight, we get greater activation of this reward system. You can see these thicker arrows going on here. And so they did some functional PET scans showing that when seeing high fat food, brains of people who struggle with weight often lit up to a greater degree, showing us that those foods are more appealing and more important to an individual who struggles with weight as opposed to someone who's naturally lean. And so what happens is this activation of the reward system overrides the control centers in our brain. So we know what we should be eating, but there's this strong impulse and strong drive to eat that's going on. So if we think about the other factors that affect our decisions to eat, another part of it is what we call low hedonic tone. So people who struggle with emotional eating might indeed in their life be experiencing a lack of joy and pleasure in other areas of their life. So this can be true of conditions like ADHD, depression, substance abuse. All of these conditions are associated with a lower hedonic tone. And so that creates a need for stimulation, all right? So what we're looking for is something rewarding, something joyful, something different from just feeling a bit blur. ADHD is a little bit different. That's a condition more where our brain is overactive and it's looking for stimulation from lots of different forms, whether it's activity or food sometimes. And the neurotransmitters in the brain that are involved with this are dopamine, noradrenaline, and serotonin, some of our what we call our happy hormones. So the questions to be thinking about in relation to this aspect of emotional eating is, how content am I feeling in my life? What is my sort of joy and pleasure like in my life? Do I struggle with anxiety or depression? Or perhaps are there feelings of loneliness and disconnection? So if you've got a background feeling of blur, of just not feeling great and that there's not much sort of to look forward to, then of course food then becomes a bit of escapism, or it can be used to self-medicate some of those conditions. Alcohol as well. Alcohol can be used to numb ourselves or as a form of winding down. And it might be innocuous at the start, but then it sets up these cycles of addiction as well. And then it's also important to think are things out of balance? Am I feeling as though one area of my life is completely hectic and crazy, and that's kind of sucking all the energy for me as well? The other factors that might affect emotional eating, our life experiences, what's happened, messages that we've received from our parents, or from affirmations about, oh, you're looking good, have you lost weight, or bullying at school about weight, can also affect how we see ourselves. So do we see ourselves in a positive light and like, you've got this, I'm rocking it, you're in control here, or you're awesome? Or do we look in the mirror and not feel so confident about who we are, what our body shape is like? And some people really say that they really have a lot of negative self-perceptions about their body that are related to their weight. So that also can lead to emotional eating, and it's a vicious cycle because we're not feeling, we've got a lack of self-esteem, low self-image. Food is used to sort of comfort, which leads to weight gain, and then the cycle continues. So it's really important to start looking at, what is my self-esteem like here? How confident am I feeling in myself? And can I see myself as important and significant outside of what my weight is? Because we shouldn't define ourselves by what our weight is, but rather who we are and what we bring to the world. Other factors that affect emotional eating are genetics as well. So that can certainly affect our food choices. Feeling restricted. So sometimes over yo-yo dieting or cycles of dieting on and off all the time, or feeling restricted, can then lead to overeating. We try and manage this at Allevia. We don't like any of our patients to feel restricted. We're big on making sure that you've got control of hunger and cravings so that losing weight becomes easy to do. Emotional regulation, that's another risk factor for emotional eating. So if we haven't quite learnt the skills of how to deal with strong emotions, be that anger, sadness, joy, if we struggle to manage those emotions because we perhaps haven't learnt how to do that in our childhood, or are struggling with anxiety, depression, that can lead to emotional eating as well, because it just becomes a way of soothing. So learning how to do that is an important part. And trauma, a history of trauma in the past, with that's childhood abuse or sexual abuse. This can lead to emotional eating as well as a way of coping. So we want to understand too what the difference is between just emotional eating, because I think we've all can relate to that time where we've had a bad day at work, or a breakup with a boyfriend, or something's not gone quite right, and we've just come home and said, oh, I need a glass of wine, or where's the ice cream and ice magic, and we've all had those moments. But then there's a level of dysfunction in eating that is really has an impact on our quality of life, and that's something called binge eating. So let's have a look at what binge eating is and how it's different from emotional eating. So binge eating is where we might eat in a discrete period of time, for example, let's say 2-hour window, an amount of food that is definitely larger than what most people would eat in that same period of time under similar circumstances. That's quite wordy, but it just means it's hard to define what is overeating, but it's eating, more food in a set period of time than what another person would in that same period of time. And that what's important here is a feeling of lack of control. So there's a sense of not being able to control the eating, feeling that you can't stop, or how much one is eating. And then the other factors that are important are that you might be eating more rapidly than normal, eating until feeling uncomfortably full, eating large amounts of food even when you're not feeling hungry, or eating alone because of feeling embarrassed about eating, or feelings of shame, embarrassment, feeling disgusted with yourself after overeating. And importantly, it's where you're not purging or bringing up your food, which is bulimia. So that's what binge eating is. And what you might like to know is that out of, there's around 16% of Australians have a form of disordered eating. So that might be emotional eating or more formal diagnoses. Of those 16%, we've got 4% of Australians have got a diagnosable eating disorder. That might be anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating. And of those 4% there, almost half of those eating disorders are binge eating disorder. So it's really common. And it's far more common than anorexia, which often hits the headlines in news. But binge eating is a real struggle for many of us. What's also interesting is that there's a bit of a crossover between ADHD and binge eating. So I mentioned ADHD before. So ADHD, there's different types of ADHD, but it's generally where the brain is either overactive, thinking all the time, can't slow down, doing things at 1,000,000 miles an hour, forgetting. That's the sort of hyperactive one. We've got also the inattentive type, where struggling to remember appointments, can't sort of focus to get a job done, finding that it's really hard to sort of getting distracted easily by things around you. And often food becomes a little bit of a stimulus and a little bit of a reward. So there's shared biology between these two conditions, particularly around there's a dysregulation of dopamine and noradrenaline. And both of those conditions have got difficulties with impulse control, stimulus and reward, and also emotional processing. So let's have a think about how we can manage emotional eating. So the first thing we want to do is look at how we can control hunger. Okay, so that's our first aspect, is that if we don't take care of the very bottom of the triangle, if there's still a strong appetite drive, no matter how well you can do with controlling your impulses, your biology is going to win hands down most 9 times out of 10. So it's really important when people say to me, I'm an emotional eater, I often say, well, you're an eater. You know, we're all eaters. And if your body is prone to weight, then you're going to have a much stronger appetite drive. So taking care of that is really crucial to managing the emotional eating that goes with it as well. Because otherwise, we're going to say to you, well, go out for a walk if you're, you know, feeling hungry. And we're like, well, yeah, but I'm feeling hungry all the time. I can't be walking and turn into Forrest Gump. So it's just about taking care of this biology part first of all. And that might be with weight loss medications. We often use ketosis with either the very low energy diet or regular food as a strategy to control hunger, or increasing protein in your diet as well. Those things are probably the key ways that you can control hunger. We also want to manage mood, identify the triggers, and try and manage our environment as best we can. And I'll start to go through each of these bit by bit. So first of all, in terms of managing hunger and appetite control, as we know, probably the most effective of all these strategies at the moment has been Ozempic, which has been in short supply. It's going to be in short supply until the end of the year now. We'll put an update about that out tomorrow, but you probably already know that from the Facebook groups. But we do have other options as well for managing hunger and appetite control. So Saxenda is a cousin of Ozempic, and it's given as a daily injection. It produces around 6 to 8% weight loss. Phentermine or Duramine, this is a stimulant. So what this can do actually is part of this is that this medication increases dopamine and noradrenaline. So often patients who struggle with binge eating find that phentermine is an effective strategy. Orlistat, we don't use at all, not very effective. Contrave, that's a medication that's the two components of this, naltrexone and bupropion, have been used for alcohol cessation and smoking cessation, and actually work on that reward center in the brain and increase dopamine and noradrenaline as well. And so it's taken as a tablet. Cost is there and the effectiveness is there as well. The trouble with Contrave is that it works in about 50% of people, whereas this has got a higher, both of these have a much higher effect, sort of strike rate or responder rate. The ones that are off-label would be Ozempic. Now, the studies that we have for Ozempic for weight loss are actually at a much higher level of 2.4. Ozempic is actually 1 milligram of semaglutide, and they showed 10 to 18% weight loss. And topiramate has got some evidence for binge eating disorder as well, and it's quite cheap, but it has a few more side effects around cognition, so fuzzy thinking, headaches, sleepiness. And next, well, they've now got a study that's been published of a new medication called tirzepatide, which is again going to be a once weekly injection, which is showing around 22.5% weight loss. So we have other forms of treatment coming upstream after Ozempic as well that are even more powerful. So 22.5% as opposed to 10 to 18%. So that's really encouraging. So for those of you who are struggling with Ozempic at the moment, just know it's not going to last forever. It will get approved, we'll get access to it again. And behind that, we have other treatments that are coming as well. So these have been, if I just go to Ozempic, these have been very powerful for patients who have struggled with emotional eating and binge eating, particularly Ozempic. And I won't forget one of our patients who said, Ozempic's been more useful than any kind of psychotherapy that I've done the whole of my life for controlling hunger and binge eating. So, so it is powerful. You can't say that that's the be all and end all, but what I'm saying is it's important to take care of that aspect if we're going to sort of ascend to the higher levels and be able to implement those more psychological strategies. So the second thing that we'll have a look at is managing our mood. So in terms of managing mood, what we want to reflect on now, and I'll get you to think about your own situation. And I should have mentioned at the very start, of course, this information is all very general information. And the beauty of us when I see a patient is we can actually go through and troubleshoot, well, what are the issues for you, and give you more tailored advice. And as I was putting together this presentation, I was thinking, how do I reach each person who struggle with emotional eating, and how do I give you something that's useful? So I've put it in terms of questions for you to think about that you can then bring to your Allevia doctor and discuss with them about whether this is relevant for you or not, because that's where the real gold is those one-on-one consultations. So in understanding how is my mood affecting my emotional eating, you want to be reflecting back and thinking, well, is there a family history of mood disorders like anxiety and depression? Do I maybe have anxiety or depression? And sometimes that's hard to pick and other times not. Sometimes it's like just this low level feeling of general apathy and lack of motivation, or lack of joy in life. But it might be that that's how you've always felt. So it's a little bit harder to pick. Or and many patients say only until I've been treated for depression do I actually realize how much I was struggling. So, looking for some of those symptoms of lack of energy, tiredness, not being able to see the future brightly, feelings of worthlessness. They're our sort of key symptoms of depression. And anxiety is where our brain is, constantly worrying about things, and, this feeling of impending doom or what's going to happen, and thinking, going over conversations 1,000 times in your head and not really reaching any resolution. Some people might identify more with those symptoms of ADHD, where they're using food for stimulation, or as a bit of a distraction from their work. And other times it just might be life stress that we're managing. So what's happening for you at the moment in terms of stressors for you? And also thinking, well, have I maybe been using alcohol to manage my mood? Have I been using it to calm down if I've been feeling anxious, or the brain's been overactive? Or is alcohol actually, in fact, making me feel depressed or anxious? Because it certainly can go both ways. I've seen many patients self-medicate their mood disorder that they weren't aware of. And I've seen many patients who got worse by drinking as well. And then on the flip side of that is, well, what things do give me joy and pleasure? What areas of my life are going well for me? What things, what are the points in my life where I'm just feeling really contented, or I can, I can sit comfortably and go, yeah, life is okay. Life is good. I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. Then what areas suck the life out of you? Because those areas will deplete your energy, will, drag down your mood. And some of these you might not be able to get rid of, like family members. So, but there will be others that will be inside your control as well. So just try to think about, have I got a really heavy workload? Am I saying yes to too many things? Am I not really, using the best of my gifts and talents? Am I trying to push the proverbial uphill? And I guess this is kind of related, but is there one particular area in your life right now that is really demanding of your energy? And what other areas, if that's the case, like let's say, okay, it's really busy at work, you've got a big project, it's short term, then you kind of, knuckle down and get that done. But if that's the case and that's where all your energy is needing to go, then how can I alleviate stresses in the other areas? Do I need to get a cleaner in? Do I need to get some pre-made meals made so that food's not an issue for me? So what areas can I modify and make life easy? But if that's you at work and that's happening every single month, then you got to change something up there. Do I have a sense of purpose and meaning in my life? So am I finding meaning in the things that I'm doing, or in the work that I do, or the people that I'm with, and the way that I contribute back to society? And what are my inherent talents and gifts, and am I in alignment with using those in both my work and my personal life? Because when you're doing those things and you're socially connected with people, when you're doing what you're meant to be doing, when you're contributing to the benefit of other people's life, that's a good recipe for some joy and happiness in your life as well. So you might like to do that little audit for yourself and think, am I putting my energies into the things that give me life, or am I putting my energies into things that suck the life out of me? And then focus on the things that are inside of your control. And if there are things that are not in your control right now, just kind of do that little analysis. Is this a short-term problem, or am I seeing this pattern happen time and time and time again, and I need to do something about it? Okay. I've got my little labels all out of order there, by the way, so don't worry about that. So we're just going to come on now to identifying the triggers. So what are the triggers for emotional eating? So I'll just reflect back. We've gone and looked at biology and taken care of our background level of hunger and appetite. We've done a little review of our mood and sort of figuring out, am I struggling with mood at the moment? Am I just experiencing life stress? Is my energies going into the places that it needs to be? And now we're understanding, well, when I get to that point where I'm going, oh, I need to have something to eat, let's try and figure out what the triggers are for that more emotional eating. So the first question to ask yourself is this hungry eating or non-hungry eating? In other words, is it been about 4 hours since I had a meal? It's probably hungry eating. Or is it something else? If it's half an hour since you ate, it's probably not hungry eating. So then when you've identified that, is this hungry or non-hungry eating, then it's good to think about, well, what are the patterns that I'm seeing here for this non-hungry eating? Are there certain triggers? It might just be the time of day, or it could be tiredness, or feeling a bit overwhelmed, or feeling too busy, or it might be that it's that winding down at the end of the day and the routines that go with that. Boredom or loneliness. So just take a moment now to have a think to yourself and think, well, what are my triggers? What are the times of day or the situations where I'm more likely to be emotional eating or non-hungry eating? So then what we want to do is kind of analyze that a little bit and say, well, what can I do about that? If I'm consistently feeling tired, what's happening with my sleep? Am I getting my 6 to 8 hours a night? Am I getting disrupted sleep? And can I do something about that? If you've got a young baby, you probably can't. If you're staying up late at night to watch Netflix, you probably can. And in terms of sleep hygiene, the most important aspect there is actually getting up at the same time every day, no matter what time you go to bed. So if you go to bed at 2 o'clock, set your alarm for 8 or 7 or whatever time it might be, and you get up at the same time, because it's that routine that will help you to fall back into a better sleep pattern. Alternatives, if you're feeling tired and no matter what, you might like to go for a brisk walk outside, or just reassess and say, well, why am I feeling tired? Am I doing too much? Am I saying yes to too many things? Or have I, how am I feeling in my mood at the moment? Then feeling overwhelmed. Why are we feeling overwhelmed? What have we got on our plate that we might need to outsource or change up? Is it stresses in the work or relationships or finances areas? And once you've kind of made those assessments and kind of gone into problem solving mode and thinking, what can I change to prevent this? But if you're still feeling a bit overwhelmed, take some time out, and I suggest you do, say, 10 to 15 minutes of mindfulness. And you might use something like, the Calm app or Smiling Mind, and just wind that little brain down after a big busy day at work or managing kids or whatever you've been doing, and just settle the brain down. So remember, we're thinking about those reward pathways again. Typically, we might use food to settle the brain down, or even alcohol. What we want to do is take a moment to recognize what our needs are. And so this is all about recognizing your unmet needs. What is it that I'm looking for that I'm using food to manage? Okay. Winding down. So the end of the day is a time that people commonly say that they might be snacking. first thing is, have you eaten enough actually throughout the day? So, I've skipped on to boredom. So people say that when they've sort of got nothing to do, like when they've just come home at the end of the day, that they're looking for something to eat. But I often find that people have either under-eaten throughout the day, don't have enough appetite suppression, or they might be skipping meals or under-eating on their protein. So good to review those three things. And then looking, well, if it is boredom eating, and if it's just a bit of a brain thought that's come in, then you might like to try the 3Ds, and that is distract, delay, and drink water. So distract yourself. Can you go and do, get distracted by checking some emails, talking to a friend on the phone, go and clean the bathroom, something really fun, or do something else instead of eating. So delay could be that you give yourself a little bit of a lay-by and say, well, if I really want that food, I can have it in 3 minutes, or 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, or however long you can manage. Often a wave comes and goes a little bit like a contraction in labor, for those of you who experience that. And it just comes and it intensifies to a peak and then passes away, typically after about 7 minutes. So if you can get busy for 10 minutes, then often that craving has come and gone. And back to winding down, that's often about trying to find something that's soothing and a way of just kind of, unpacking for the day. So, and it's often associated with times of day like, oh, I've just finished my dinner, I'm just going to sit on the couch, watch some TV, and then we get these associations with food happening. So it might be that you change things up a little bit and look at, well, what else can I do that's soothing or calming? Maybe it's going and having a shower, or listening to some music, or something that you find soothing. So just have a think in your mind at this point in time what you find soothing, and that might be what you reach out for instead. And then that very top of the pyramid was actually our conscious control coming in. Okay, so a lot of our food decisions are driven by biology and our natural hunger drives, and then our psychology and our mood, and then our behaviors. And so what we want to do, we're not powerless in all of this situation, but it does take a little bit more effort to use that conscious control to override some biological drives. But what I want you to do is invite yourself to introduce your brain and ask your brain, what is the reward that I'm actually looking for? What is the gap that I'm trying to fill here? What of my needs are actually not being met at the moment? And what could I possibly do instead of eating food? So try to think to yourself when you're reaching for some food, what is my needs right now? Am I looking for stimulation? Am I looking for unpacking and unwinding for the day? Am I tired and need to be focusing on my sleep, or rebalancing things in my life, and just trying to reassess? I'll just give you a little hint here. Whatever you do as an alternative, it's actually never going to be as sexy and as attractive as that block of chocolate, because that real dopamine hit, that's strong and powerful. That's a little bit like your cocaine there. Not that I've tried cocaine before, but that is a powerful force. And what you need to know is that having a few nuts or a yogurt instead of chocolate is never going to taste as good as chocolate. And I can vouch for that. But what we're doing is we're inviting our brain in to say, here, I know that food is delicious and yummy. The actual reward and the dopamine release actually gets stimulated already by seeing the food or thinking about it. So basically you've had your hit. Then your decision point is right there, where you say, okay, now's my choice. I can go ahead and have that if I really want to, and if it fits with my bigger decisions, or I'm just going to allow my higher centers of my brain to kick in and help me make the decision that's going to help me move in the direction of my greatest health. So just know that when we give you all these suggestions for distractions and other things you can do, it's hard work, and it does require a bit more practice and discipline and willpower to be saying no at times. So we've talked about controlling hunger, we've talked about managing mood, we've talked about identifying the triggers, and now we're going to look at how we can control our environment. It's really hard when you know that you're prone to emotional eating, to be making healthy choices if you've got a blocks of chocolate. You open up the pantry or the fridge and there's some ice cream jumping out at you, or the chocolate blocks are there. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at your home environment and think, well, what have I got here that's making it hard for me to make the right decisions? Can I do a little bit of a pantry or a kitchen clean out and make sure that my food, my house is fully stocked with allowing me to make healthy choices? And if tiredness is one of those things that you struggle with and you're looking for the easy meal options, then maybe it's reaching out for some of the pre-made meals. So that could be things like My Muscle Chef, Dynamic, Hello Fresh, YouFoods, all these sorts of options. So try and, like I said before, if there's areas in your life that are hectic and crazy and you're needing things to be easy in one area, try some pre-made meals and make it easy on yourself. Okay, so finally, what tonight might have brought up for you is kind of some thoughts that, you know what, I may need some more help in this area. Maybe I am struggling a bit more with anxiety and depression than what I realized, or maybe I need some more help with hunger and cravings. So there's a few ways that you can reach out for help. So if it's around your general health or mood, then your regular GP might be appropriate. Our Alivia GPs as well are very good at managing mood, especially when it's in relation to weight. You may need to see a psychologist to discuss some of these things and strategies. And there are some very good psychologists that work around weight management and around body image and binge eating that our Alivia doctors can talk to you about. In the app, so we've got a new app for those of you, some of you have upgraded already. This app is now being used around Australia. So we've just rebranded it. So the Velita app. And there's a couple of modules in there on how to break bad habits and dealing with hunger and cravings as well. And if you have identified after tonight that maybe binge eating is an issue for you, there are some useful resources in the Inside Out website. Or if you're wondering whether ADHD is something that you've been struggling with, then there's also some information on that website chat as well. Okay, so that's the end of the formal part of the presentation. I've gone a little bit longer because it's quite an in-depth topic, I guess. And so now I'm just going to put it out there to others who have questions. Just pop them in the chat and we can go over those bit by bit. So feel free to pop it in the chat or just write share if you'd like to share an experience or something that resonated with you tonight. And also, I think, so Jessica asked, can we get those links emailed to us? After tonight, I'll be sending an email out to everyone with a recording of tonight, and I'll pop those links in there for you as well. So the other thing to say is that this is a very, it's a topic where there's a lot of vulnerability that we discuss. So anything that's discussed tonight is obviously confidential and sits inside this group. Ruth, yes, the Velita app does replace the Alivia app. The Alivia app's going to be still available until the 1st of October, but we're just gradually transitioning everyone across to the Velita app, just because it's best for us to be updating the one app, and we'll be adding, there's an extra 100 recipes in this one, and there's some mindfulness resources, videos that are coming as well. Yeah, so Kate was just saying, not a question, but this has been really useful for understanding what we're going through and not to be too hard on ourselves when we do fall off the bandwagon. Yeah, I think that's really true, Kate, because if we think about it, that biological drive to survive is strong. And now the trouble that we have now is we're now met with an environment where people, like I said at the start, food manufacturers have worked out the foods that are highly appealing and they're marketing to us. It's there all the time. At the end of the shopping aisle, everything's on special, and you go out for meals and there's high calorie foods available all the time, and our brains are hardwired for that. So So it's hard to say no. We've still got power. We're not powerless little human beings in all of this. We've still got our higher control centers, but we need to sort of take care of that appetite drive primarily, and have some really good strategies in our sort of psychological toolkit to pull out that we can use. And I think a lot of it's taking care of our mood and our background level of joy and satisfaction in life, and finding that sweet spot, which is, you know, just the work of the whole of our lives, but that's okay. How do we deal? So here's some good questions. How do we deal with multiple issues like anxiety, emotional eating, and binge eating? Well, that's extremely common as well. So we don't silo things. You know, you're a human being. We don't go, oh, well, here's your anxiety over here and here's your binge eating over here. They're all linked together. So as you could see from that little pyramid that we discussed, if you're feeling anxious, then you're going to be looking for food to soothe, and that sort of forms part of that emotional eating. Binge eating, the rates of binge eating and depression and anxiety and ADHD and alcohol use very high. So 20 to 50% of patients have those other conditions as well. So those two things go together because they both share those common pathways too, about a low level of joy and pleasure and looking for soothing and stimulation. So how you deal with that is, you know, as a doctor, I've been looking at, well, what's the family history like, and what are some of the life events that might have led to that? And is it more of a biological anxiety, like it's been there for forever, no matter what life circumstances come along, and there's a strong family history that might point us towards more medication for anxiety. So in terms of binge eating, there are some specific pharmacological treatments for binge eating. So Vyvanse is a stimulant medication used for ADHD. Look at the crossover there. The two medications are used for the same condition, and that does help somewhat in controlling binge eating. It helps with control of impulses and meal planning. What I've found, and what many of our patients have found, is that if a patient has been on Ozempic and Vyvanse, the Ozempic wins hands down for control of hunger and appetite, actually. So it seems as though the Vyvanse is more important for control of impulses, but the Ozempic really helps with that biological aspect and the hunger aspect. And it kind of reinforces what we said, got to take care of that bottom part of the pyramid first to thrive on the higher levels. But in terms of binge eating, it's not just here's a medication to be fixed. It's let's look at the triggers and let's look at strategies to manage binge eating. I don't have my books here. I'll also send around, there are some really great books on binge eating, and a lot of it involves doing some psychological work. So CBT or guided self-help is effective for binge eating. There's a book called The DBT Solution for Binge Eating by Deborah Saffer, and there's another book, Overcoming Binge Eating by Craig Fairbairn. So I'll pop those in the links as well. What mechanism is for a sweet treat after dinner when you are not hungry but sitting watching the TV? So common. Oh my gosh, so common. Yeah, so you've had the situation where you've been craving more sugar while on Ozempic and diabetic, and wondered if there's a link to this. Not really, in terms of the diabetic, issue. It's not about a drop in blood sugars that has us doing that. I think that's really more part of that stimulation and soothing. We've often worked hard all day and managing kids or managing work, and it's the first moment for the day that we get to go and take a load off. And it's not hungry eating, because we've often just eaten. But so your Ozempic there is actually a good distinguisher. If you've got Ozempic up to the right dose and you've got good hunger control, you're not feeling hungry for most of the day, but you're still looking for food, then that's definitely the reward aspect of eating. So Ozempic's fantastic for covering off the biological hunger. But if you're getting more of that reward eating, then that's where more of your psychological strategies can kick in. So maybe that's more about, have I been flat chat busy and not taking a breath throughout the day? And I need to be slowing down the pace of what I'm doing, practicing mindfulness throughout the day. Am I eating properly throughout the day? Am I just go and not giving myself any rest? So creating those pauses in your day, or it might just be about that association with sitting down. So we get those habits and those cues. Oh, okay, it's 7 o'clock. I've just had dinner. I'm on the couch. The TV's on. where's my popcorn? So those things are really common. So I put this in the app, but one time we actually just changed the furniture around in our lounge room to have the couches sit in different ways. So we would sit and talk to each other rather than watch the TV. I'm not saying you have to be that extreme, but try and change things up in your routines a little bit. So maybe you don't sit down and watch TV, but you go and, wind down and have a shower or a bath, or lay down on your bed and just do a couple of minutes of deep breathing, or you put some music on in the room and jig around and have a dance in the kitchen. So it's just about changing things up. Different things work for different people. But yeah, I think it's, to answer to your question there, Murray, it's just around associations and looking for stimulus and soothing. So we wanted to try and find the non-food soothing ways. Someone's tried Duromine in the past and found it caused sleep deprivation, then mood swings, but I lost a lot of weight, then put it back on, and some. So it depends on the dose. So we know because it's a stimulant that can affect sleep, dry mouth, palpitations, headaches. They're all possible side effects. Duromine is more likely to have mood swings versus its cousin Vyvanse. So Vyvanse has less mood effects, is a stimulant. Both of them are stimulants, but less mood effects on Vyvanse, and less. For people who have ADHD, they actually get better sleep because they're active during the day when they need to be, and then they get okay, I've done my thinking now, I can kind of stop. So it's a paradox, but some people find that their sleep is better. You also talked about putting the weight back on, and I think that what that reflects is that when you're using Duromine, it controls hunger and appetite, and when you're not using it, it doesn't. And this is the very issue with long-term weight control, is that if you've been born with a genetic set point or a predisposition to weight and you get weight off, your body works hard to put it back on again, to help you, because you've gone through a famine. So it's going to help you to manage that. So managing weight is a long-term issue. And so that's where Ozempic is really helpful, because you can use that in the longer term. Not everyone needs medication to keep their weight off. We can use other strategies as well, but it's not a fault of Duromine or of you that you put the weight back on. It's just that the appetite suppression was there and then it wasn't. So just want to thank Tracy for mentioning around Ozempic and the shaming. So this is a real issue, and it's might get a little harder in the next couple of months. And the first thing I want to say is, there's no one condition is more important than another. So, the struggle with weight is no more or no less important than diabetes or asthma or epilepsy or cancer. There's no one, who gets to judge which condition deserves treatment or not. However, in our system, we have had this medication approved for type 2 diabetes, not obesity yet, but we do hope that will be coming. So, and I think what's happened is it's just because of this prioritization, and because people, it elicits strong responses, because it bloody well works. It's effective. And so everyone's trying to look after their health to manage their particular condition, whether that's diabetes or weight gain. And it's also reflecting, I think, some of the inherent bias and stigma that exists around obesity and weight gain, that people think it might just be, a choice. No one chooses to put on weight. It's not fun. So that's, I apologize, and on behalf of our colleagues and pharmacists everywhere, and you don't deserve that. You deserve access to treatment. We'll always provide you with the best care that we can. And we just hope that this eases really soon, so that you guys can get access to the treatments that you deserve. So apologies on behalf. Another question there, I didn't want to go on binge eating medication recommended by a psychiatrist, as I was told one of the side effects was agitation and anxiety. And as I was already being diagnosed with anxiety, it was concerned that I would make it worse. Yeah, so this is part of the tricky part too, is managing those two conditions side by side, particularly anxiety and binge eating. So a good question, Rachel, to think about is, what's of most concern to me at this point in time? Is the binge eating really having an impact on things, or is my anxiety most important to keep under control, if you do have it under control at the moment? So I think it's trying to assess at this particular point in time, what is the priority, because they may be conflicting. not everyone does get anxiety on this medication, but as doctors will always consent you for the possible side effects. And if Ozempic was freely available, then that would probably be a better option for the binge eating. But in the absence of that, then, there is Saxenda that doesn't have an effect on mood. That might be better. Anyway, I shouldn't be doing advice. I don't know your history, and it's not appropriate to give medical advice. But in general terms, I would just say that it's about figuring out which is the greater priority at this point in time, and then looking at, well, what's going to help to get me there with the least amount of side effects, and prioritizing what's important to you. Yeah, Michelle's pointed out a number of warnings flagging the link between Ozempic and thyroid cancer. This is a common issue that's brought up because it's not an issue for Ozempic. The reason that there's these warnings exist is because they injected very high levels of a different medication, the one that's in Saxenda, so liraglutide. They injected really high levels into rat brains, and they got a medullary thyroid cancer because of the effect of the GLP-1 on the C cells in the thyroid. We don't have many C cells in our thyroid at all. We've got a very different structure to our thyroid glands, to our little rat friends. And so there hasn't been an increase in thyroid cancer in humans. So the warning exists because of the studies that were done on liraglutide on rats, and that's just carried over until it's been around long enough for us to know whether there's an impact on humans. Having said that, this class of medications has been around for 25 years, and there hasn't been an increase in thyroid cancers in humans. But because Ozempic's been around for 2 years, we don't know yet. So in other words, we're not concerned about it. We've seen trials, when we group all the trials together, there's almost 10,000 patients that have been studied on Ozempic in the different trials, and there hasn't been any flagging of increase in thyroid cancer risk, or any cancer risk actually in that. Fantastic. Phew. We can all keep taking the Ozempic. Yay. Wonderful. Well, so nice to see so many of you tonight. Thank you for carving out the time, and for all of your comments and questions. That's really helpful. I hope tonight's been helpful for you. We will send around this video recording, and if anything's come up out of tonight's session for you, we know that it may well. Please link in with our Allevia doctors, and we can assist you through that. But hopefully, it's in giving you some tips and strategies and a bit of enlightenment. Thanks, guys.